Okay, hello YouTube. This will be video number 2 for the Evans Gambit, and we're going to be focusing most of our energy on this video on the retreat. We're going to be focusing on the retreat bishop to a5. After bishop takes b4, c3, we're going to be focusing most of our energy on the move bishop a5. And this gives me another opportunity to talk more about something that I touched on in the other video. I pointed out that two of the defenses that we have to avoid in modern practice when we're playing the Evans Gambit is we have to avoid what we call the Lasker defense, and I showed you how to avoid that with the early d4. And another thing that you have to avoid is something called the half compromise defense. And that's different than the compromise defense. So I want you to know what both of these are. Now, the compromise defense, the full compromise defense, is say it happens after d4, and then they capture, they play e captures d4, and then you castle. Or actually, I'm going to be recommending a slightly different move here because, like I said, I want to avoid what's known as the half compromise defense. And then d captures c3. This is the full compromise defense. You need to know what this is to know what the half compromise defense is. Now, the full compromise defense, I'll just show you one quick little game in the full compromise defense, and this can actually be found in my 60 memorable games. This was Bobby Fischer versus Reuben Fine that continued queen to b3, and then it went queen e7, and then after knight to c3. That game continued knight f6, and this was actually a pretty famous game that ended pretty quickly. Fischer played bishop b2, taking this long diagonal, and then after the move queen to g5, kind of keeping the queen on this file, Fischer did a cool little distraction. He first distracted the queen with the move h4, and apparently there wasn't a good way to keep the queen on the g7 pawn, and his opponent did actually take, and then Fischer took here, and this was an important in-between move. He wanted to cover the f8 square, and then he brought the rook to e1 with check, and it doesn't matter if the bishop takes or doesn't take. It doesn't change the end result of the game. And then he played a very cutesy move here. If you want to take a second, pause the video, see if you can find it. He finished off the game with queen g3, which was an excellent distraction of the queen. And then after queen captures, you of course have bishop f6 mate. Reuben Fine, Fischer's opponent, of course, just resigned after queen g3, and that game ended very badly. But the compromise defense, in general, taking all the pawns in all of its forms, is usually pretty bad. And just in general in the Evans Gambit, I don't recommend ever taking all the pawns. That's why people started trying something that they call the half compromise defense, which is something that you need to avoid. And it's actually interesting because they can try the half compromise defense after both bishop a5 and bishop c5, but I'll show you how we avoid it in both cases. So the half compromise defense is after castles, black plays the move knight on g to e7. Now, at first, this looks like white should be able to get some sort of major advantage here with a move like knight g5. We're double attacking f7. And of course, if we castle kingside question mark, we're going to follow up with queen h5. And we're going to be hitting h7 and f7. This is kind of a well-known little tactical motif, where white would be completely winning. But the idea of the half compromise defense is to put in this in-between move d5. And this is really important. After e takes d5, you do not capture with knight takes d5. If you did so, you would end up in something very similar to a fried liver attack where knight takes f7 takes place, except it's even worse than the normal fried liver because, of course, we're already castled and we already have an open e-file. That king's actually just going to get checkmated really quickly. If you're not familiar with the fried liver, like after, say, knight takes d5, we could play a move like knight f7, and then queen f3 hitting the king and hitting the knight. And normally in the fried liver, they try to at least make believe that this is okay by playing king e6, but in this case, it's just total suicide. We have a rook coming to e1. This game would just be over. Okay, so we cannot play knight takes d5, but that's not the idea of the half compromise. The idea of the half compromise is knight to e5. And then actually, in this position, theory holds that black is doing okay. So my recommendation is, if this equalizes kind of along with the Lasker variation, what we need to do is we just need to avoid this variation. We need to play a move order that doesn't allow it. And that's why here I don't recommend castles queenside. What I recommend instead is the move that the big boys play. I recommend the move queen to b3. Okay, and we'll get into that later. But it's generally speaking a good idea to force some sort of defense of the f7 pawn with, like, say, either queen e7 or actually, as Kasparov played against Short, queen f6, and to try to get them to commit to that first before you do anything else. So the other way that they can try to play the compromised defense is they can try with the move bishop to c5. And then, of course, I still recommend d4, and then e takes d4, and then I still recommend castles kingside. So, of course, they could still try the half-compromised defense with knight on g to e7. And again, I don't recommend the move knight g5, because we're going to have a very similar thing. It's going to be d5, e5, knight e5, and this is actually similar enough that this should still be equality or even slight edge black. Black is doing quite all right here. He can finish his development castle without any real difficulties. So what I recommend instead is you play c captures d4 first. And this is one of the other big disadvantages of having this bishop on c5. We're hitting this bishop, and then after bishop to b6, now you have a free hand to do whatever you want, because after the move knight to g5, d5, e takes d5, as you can see, there is no knight e5, because the pawn is covering it. So we're going to have to settle for a different move. We're going to have to settle for a move like knight a5. And in these positions, I feel like white is certainly doing okay. I'm not exactly certain on the exact correct continuation here. White has the option. He can kind of go wild. He could play a move like d6, and these variations are pretty wild. I'm not exactly sure how this might end, but I know that white's doing okay here. And of course, white could play, other moves as well. And I think in any case, I think white's doing just fine. Okay, so, and even here, of course, white doesn't have to play knight g5. White could just develop, and I think white's doing fine. Again, any situation where white has the center and the game remains open, usually white has enough compensation for the material. Okay, so we need to avoid, after bishop to a5, we need to avoid the half compromised defense. So we're going to play d4, and then after e takes d4, we're going to play queen b3. Now this is specifically to avoid the half compromised defense. We're throwing in this move to make sure that this knight can't go to e7. Now, of course, if the knight still wants to go to e7, they can play the move queen f6. Now, queen e7 leads to something very similar to the compromised defense. If they play queen e7, then we're going to play just d4. And then, I mean, there's a lot of continuations here, but white seems to be doing okay in all of them. So, for example, e takes d4 castles. This could transpose directly into our Fischer versus Rubin Fine game. Now, most modern players will try to play something else. They'll try to play something like d6 or knight f6 or bishop b6. So they might try this. They might try this. They might try knight f6. And it's hard to go over each of these individually, but I'll say that white has a slight advantage in all of these. Like, for example, knight f6, I would recommend something like either rook e1 or e5 here are probably both fine. I've played e5 in the past, and I've had success with this type of variation. Is usually more than enough compensation for the material. And again, the reason is because we've managed to keep the king in the middle of the board. We've managed to keep the position open. And those are usually just the two criteria to have some sort of advantage. Another way you can play this is you can just shuffle your rook to e1. And then after, say, castles, then you would play e5. So you're kind of safeguarding this pawn. Then after knight e8, you would do something like this. This is a much more materialistic way of playing it, but it should be acceptable. This should also lead to some type of slight edge for white. It's more materialistic, and tactically I would say it's a little bit more complicated to remember, but this seems like slight edge white as well. This seems just fine. Okay, so that's another way that you can play it. So I think we kind of established that, like, queen e7, maybe not the best place to put the queen. And we should have a slight edge in all cases after queen e7. So we have to look at, okay, after we play bishop a5, and then, of course, our move d4, we need to play this. It's critical that we play d4. And then we're going to play e takes d4, and then, of course, we're going to insert our queen b3 to avoid the half-compromised defense. The other attempt, and this is one of the real attempts that black has to try to get equality here, and, of course, not just because Kasparov did it, but yeah, probably because Kasparov did it, is queen f6 And then, of course, we still have to play kind of. We have to be. There was a really good game between Garry Kasparov and Nigel Short, and it went after, again, d4, and I'm got to get my move order right here. We do d4 first, e takes d4, and then we play queen b3, and then, of course, we have queen f6 here. So after queen f6, there was a really good game between, like I said, between Nigel Short and Garry Kasparov that went castles kingside, and then Garry Kasparov played d3. And this was his idea, was just to make this pawn kind of awkward to capture. It kind of harkens back to the original days of kind of the Evans Gambit, where people did this kind of, they pushed to d3. It reminds me kind of the Evergreen game, which of course we can never repeat today because nobody plays that badly anymore with black. But after d3, it seems like, I would say, white's doing okay. Like, we just play a move like, say, e5, and, capturing is not looking very good, so you're stuck with one of the two queen moves. Now, Garry Kasparov, he picked the move queen g6 in his game against Nigel Short. I would also say queen f5 is going to be ostensibly the same move. I think they're about the same. And then, of course, in either case, I would recommend how Short followed up, which was rook d1, and then followed with the move bishop to d3. And I actually feel like white has a slight advantage in these positions. Garry Kasparov did end up winning his game against Nigel Short, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the opening. Nigel Short was probably better in that game. Nigel Short was probably winning at one point, actually. He probably had a decisive advantage. But Garry Kasparov is Garry Kasparov, and he's gonna find a way to win. He's gonna just play so accurately and just outcalculate everybody that he plays. So Garry Kasparov did win with this variation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I think it's a serious attempt for equality. I don't think that game went very well. The only thing that makes it a serious attempt is the fact that Garry Kasparov did it, and he won with it. But beyond that, I think white's just slight edge after rook d1. So that's how you avoid the half compromised defense after bishop a5. So now I want to look at more serious attempts by black after bishop a5 to equalize. And I would say the most serious attempt for black to equalize in this position is the move d6. And I would consider this definitely the main line. And I think most of the theoreticians consider this definitely the main line. And the reason this is the main line is because black is doing what black needs to do here. Black is trying to keep this position closed. He's trying to make sure that the position doesn't open and his king doesn't stay in the middle and white has an advantage. This is how you defend against the Evans. This is really how you defend against any gambit where you've won a pawn. You need to try to consolidate the position, and the first thing you need to do is you just need to make sure the position doesn't open where the massive development lead is going to be a huge advantage. So what black is trying to do here is black is trying to get to one of those other defenses that we have to avoid. Like I said, you got to avoid the half compromised and you've got to avoid the Lasker. He's trying to get to the Lasker. He's trying to hope that you just castle kingside, and if you do, that's a question mark move, and he would play bishop b6, and boom, he's in his Lasker defense, and it's pretty much mission accomplished. You can't make huge progress here, because, again, queen b3 is met by knight a5, see previous video. So that's not going to work for you. You have to avoid this. So the only real way to avoid it is, again, with this very important move order nuance, is the move queen b3. You have to play queen b3 while you still can. You got to get while the getting's good. You got to play queen b3, and there's no knight a5 here because the bishop is still in a5. That means he's going to have to find some way to defend f7, and in this case, his options are actually kind of limited. If he plays queen f6 or queen e7, he's running into the difficulty that there's a trick here against this knight. There's d5, and then say the knight retreats. This bishop is hanging in air on a5, and we're going to win it for free. Okay? So the normal move that gets played here is queen to d7. Okay? And at this point, I recommend capturing on e5. Now, right here is where you will have a lot of players make a really typical error. You want to keep the position closed. Okay? I don't recommend recapturing this pawn. And this is one of the things about the Evans Gambit. When people ask me, well, how can you play an opening like the Evans Gambit? You're going to be down a pawn. In a lot of the main lines, like a lot of the best attempts to try to get equality in the Evans Gambit right now, which I would say are this variation, And I would also say another attempt to get equality with black, or to, try to get some sort of slight edge black, is in the lines with bishop e7. And I would also say the declined. These are the three serious lines that could potentially give the Evans Gambit headaches. In all three of these lines, people are giving back the pawn. Okay, so you're not really gambiting anything in the Evans Gambit, because I honestly think with best play, I think they need to give back this pawn. I don't think they have a right to keep it or a good way to keep it. And I think that's really important. I don't think there's a good way to keep this pawn. So if they capture the pawn either with the knight or with the pawn, it looks like black is getting into some sort of trouble one way or another. So the one where they get into the most trouble is knight takes e5. And then after knight takes e5, d takes e5, the idea is we just castle, and we're going to bring that rook to the open d file. Now this bishop is still hanging in air, so usually this bishop will retreat because they don't want their bishop to be hanging. When I play rook d1, queen moves, queen a4 check, we just win the bishop. But now rook d1 anyway, and now I have another idea. After queen e7, I have this pretty incredible move here. I have the move bishop takes f7 check, which is just an amazing move. And the whole point is I'm winning a massive amount of material here. The best move is probably just to move the king over to f8. If queen to f7, we're going to play rook d8 check, and then we can't take the rook because our queen is hanging. So we're going to have to play king e7, and then here's the trick. We're going to bring this bishop to g5 check. And then after knight blocks, we're going to play rook takes rook, or we're going to exchange queens first and play rook takes rook. Either way, this is going to be major advantage white. We have a clear advantage here. We are up at a lot of material. Okay, so rewinding, we don't want to take with the knight. So the other question is, well, what if we take with the pawn? Well, pretty much the same plan. We're going to castle, and then bishop b6, and then we're going to play rook d1, and they're going to play queen e7. Now, this is kind of a critical moment. My recommendation is the move a4. Okay, and what's cool about the move a4 is what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make the ideas of bishop takes f7 or bishop a3 followed by bishop f7. I'm trying to make these ideas continue to work. So if, for example, they were to play knight a5 question mark, which looks like it's a move that's on the table, bishop f7 actually works here. Queen f7, rook d8, it's ostensibly the exact same idea because, like I said, we're exchanging those queens, so that gets my queen out of danger, and then we're taking that rook. So the move a4 seems like this is the way to go if you want to get some type of advantage here with white. It leaves open the most possibilities for continuing to improve your position. So basically, a couple of lines here. They could play a6 to give their bishop some retreat. I would recommend bishop d5. I think this position is slight edge white. They could also play the move bishop e6, which we might consider the main line. I recommend, again, the move a5 here. And then I'm not exactly sure what I would consider best. If, for example, bishop f2, king f1, I think this is going to be slight edge white after some more tactical fireworks here. And again, this is a pretty wild position, so it's very hard to assess, and it's very hard to assess if all of these moves are completely accurate. But I do feel like white is coming out on top here. And this is just like an example. And of course, this is still a very wild position. We've got 3 pieces. We've got 2 pieces for the rook and a lot of pawns on the board. And there's a lot of crazy pyrotechnics that just happened there. So it's hard to assess that position, but I would say bishop f2, I would say is still advantage white. And then, of course, the other variation is knight takes a5. I would just recommend taking. And then, again, like if bishop takes a5, you've got difficulties on the b7 square, among other things. So, if, for example, bishop takes a5, probably the easiest solution is we could just exchange here. And then again, this bishop is hanging in the air on a5, so you could play queen to b5 check and just pick up this bishop. This is clearly advantage white. So you're doing pretty good here. And also there's issues on the b7 square. So basically the long and short of it is you play this position and you play a4. If you can remember the move, castles kingside rook d1 and then a4 in case they take this pawn. And of course if knight takes e5, you don't even need a4 because there's no knight a5. So the modern main line is the move bishop to b6. And of course the move bishop to b6, this is really black's best hope to to equalize. Okay, so touching on this position a little bit further, a lot of people are under the impression this is slight edge black. And I would say that in the old days, in the old lines, that was probably true. If white was required to play e captures d6, I would say after knight a5, queen b4, knight c4, queen d6, I believe this position is slight edge black. I think that black has given back the material, and he's given back the material in a very smart way. He has the bishop pair. He should be able to consolidate his position and get castled with pretty much no difficulties. I don't recommend this for white. I don't recommend e captures d6, even though we can play e captures d6, we can get our pawn back, and at the very least we'll have no risk in our position. I don't think this is the way to play chess. I think there are actually two options here that a couple of modern players have tried. I think the one cool option is an option that was actually tried by Leela Chess Zero. It goes knight on b to d2, and then her idea was basically to just try to get black to take this pawn back right away, and then play the move a4, which is actually a pretty clever idea. And actually a4 immediately is kind of my recommendation in this case, instead of knight on b to d2. But I think these ideas are kind of interchangeable. And then the Leela's idea was after knight a5, she played queen a2, and then queen e7, of course, to hold the e5 pawn, bishop a3, putting the bishop on the long diagonal, queen f6 castles, knight e7, and then a really clever idea to keep the king in the middle of the board, a whole piece sacrifice here with knight takes e5, queen e5, bishop f7 check, king f8, and then attacking the queen having to pull back to f6, the bishop retreated to d5, and then after c6 attacking the bishop, Leela activated her last piece with rook a to e1. And of course you can see that e captures d5 with pressure on e7 is not possible. And actually Leela was able to keep up the pressure in this position, even being a whole piece down. Just having the extra space, having the center of the board, all the things we like in the Evans Gambit. She was able to keep up the pressure, and she beat Stockfish. So, I mean, if you're beating Stockfish in this position, you're doing pretty good. So, I don't think that this is equality. I think Leela had slight edge pretty much the entire time. So I think knight on b to d2 is a way that you can try to get slight advantage. I think another way to try to get a slight advantage for white is the alternative a4, which is a very similar idea, even to Leela's idea. And then there was a game between Nakamura and Anand that went down this path. And although Nakamura, playing the white pieces here, failed to win this game, as you'll see from the game, he was never in any real trouble of losing. He always had an advantage. He always had a little bit more space, and he always had a little bit more play and a little bit more initiative, although unfortunately he never had quite enough to win. Those are my two recommendations against this bishop b6 and then this bishop b6 line. This is one of the attempts, though, to equalize for black, and this is probably the most serious attempt to equalize for black in the bishop a5 lines right now. But white is not ending up down a pawn, and white has plenty of room to play for an advantage from here. Okay, so in the next video, we're going to be covering the more modern move, bishop e7, and then in the video after that, we're going to be covering the closed variation, the declined variation, and then maybe some other attempts. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you learned something new about chess.